In the 16th century, a man with a gold-hooped earring and a little goatee picked up a quill and wrote some of the finest sonnets the world has ever seen. 500 years later, a man with nothing better to do sits down with a microphone and tries to work out what the hell that bloke was going on about. Welcome to the final couplet. Hello there, and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. We've made it all the way to Sonnet 34, and if you've listened to all of the episodes, I commend you for your willpower and your ability to sit through what at this point is hours of me talking about Shakespeare. So well done. Give yourself a big pat on the back and maybe have a cup of tea or a coffee, a cup of joe, as they say in the US. I had a brilliant moment actually this week where someone showed me a sonnet and said, which one's this? You know, like they were testing me. And I said, why, that's Sonnet 29. And it was. And I surprised myself. And I made everyone think that I was very clever and knew what I was talking about. So that was a good moment for me. I think it was lucky that it was Sonnet 29 because that's one of the ones that I like. If it was one of the ones, you know, where he's telling recipient of the sonnet that he needs to have kids, I don't know if I would have remembered which one of those that was, you know, because sonnets 1 to 18 are pretty much identical in their meaning, so that would be harder. But I was quite proud of myself actually. Anyway, we've got a hell of a sonnet coming up this week. It's Sonnet 34, but I would like you to think of it as Sonnet 33 Part 2, because for me it's very much a second section to Sonnet 33. But as Shakespeare likes to do, he likes to do a second section, like a Part 2, but he doesn't call it 33 Part 2, obviously. He calls it 34 because, you know, he wants to try and get his numbers up. He's trying to, you know, he's writing hundreds of these, and if he was doing Part 1 and Part 2, he might not have got to 100. And that was his ultimate aim when he was writing the sonnets, was to get to 100 sonnets, just so he could say to his mates at the pub, I've written 100 sonnets. What have you done? So if you remember his Sonnet 33 last week, Shakespeare was pretty pissed off at the recipient of that sonnet, and he was sort of comparing him to the sun and sort of being clouded, and it was all this big metaphor for the recipient of the poem being a bit of an arsehole, essentially. And then the final couplet is like, but it's fine, you can be an arsehole, I forgive you because I love you. And so that's good to remember going into Sonnet 34 because it's a very similar theme. Let's have a listen, shall we? Sonnet 34. Why didst thou promise such a beauteous day, and make me travel forth without my cloak, to let base clouds o'ertake me in my way, hiding the bravery in their rotten smoke? 'Tis not enough that through the clouds thou break, to dry the rain on my storm-beaten face. For no man well of such a salve can speak, that heals the wound and cures not the disgrace. Nor can thy shame give physic to my grief. Though thou repent, yet I have still the loss. The offender's sorrow lends but weak relief to him that bears the strong offence's cross. Ah, but those tears are pearl which thy love sheds, and they are rich, and ransom all ill deeds. So you see now how it's very much a Sonnet 33 Part 2. And if you haven't listened to Sonnet 33, you can go back and listen to that. And I recommend it because, you know, it's like It's like watching Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 before Part 1, or not even watching Part 1. I mean, that would be crazy, wouldn't it? But he's clearly upset. But then it's that thing of, writing a load of stuff and going, you've really annoyed me, and you're kind of pissing me off at the moment, but I forgive you because I love you. So he obviously felt guilty by the end. Like, in the whole process of writing this sonnet, he got guilty, and then at the end he was like, I still love you though. I'm just saying words, really. I still love you. And I like these two sonnets because it's Shakespeare, he's really expressing himself here. And he's saying, the recipient of these poems, you're pissing me off. You're annoying me and you're being kind of horrible. But I still love you. I'm conflicted. And dare I say, it does sound a bit like Shakespeare's in a toxic relationship. Now, I don't know if historians have mentioned this before. They might have done, but I haven't heard about it. And I might be the first one to say Shakespeare was in a toxic relationship. And these are the signs. And maybe this was Shakespeare's plea for help. But people just thought, oh, that's a nice sonnet. Oh, well done. Oh, he's a good writer, isn't he? But actually, if you really dive into them, what's going on? He's being treated terribly. Anyway, let's try and break down this sonnet line by line, shall we? So we start with, why didst thou promise such a beauteous day, and make me travel forth without my cloak? Now that has to be the best start to one of Shakespeare's sonnets, I think. A real cracker. And I think he's talking to the sun here, but the sun, of course, is a metaphor. This whole thing is a metaphor for his relationship with the recipient of the poem. So think of the sun, I think, as the recipient. But he's essentially saying, you told me it was going to be a nice day and it was all sunny and you were out and making everything look lovely. So I left the house without my cloak, my raincoat, my Macintosh, my umbrella. So he's pissed off that he hasn't bought his coat. It's as simple as that. Then he continues with, to let base clouds overtake me in my way, hiding thy bravery in their rotten smoke. So this is very similar to Sonnet 33, but he's saying, so I left the house and I didn't bring my cloak because you made the day look all lovely. And then the bloody clouds come in, hiding your radiance and beauty with their rotten smoke. 'Tis not enough that through the clouds thou break to dry the rain on my storm-beaten face. So now he's all wet because of the rain clouds and everything. And you know what? The damage is done. It's not enough that you, the sun, is peeking through the clouds to dry my storm-beaten face. What's done is done. It's annoying. I'm pissed off already. For no man well of such a salve can speak, that heals the wound and cures not the disgrace. So here I think he's saying, you can heal the wound so you can dry my wet face, but I'm disgraced because I've come out without my bloody cloak. And I'm annoyed and I'm disgraced clearly because everyone's walking past me and I'm wet through, and they've all bought their raincoats, and it's not a good look, I'll tell you that. So look, you can heal the wounds, but you haven't healed the disgrace that I'm feeling. Nor can thy shame give physic to my grief. Though thou repent, yet I have still the loss. So here he's saying, look, and I know you're ashamed about what's happened, about you tricking me, giving the impression of it being a sunny day, and then all the rain clouds come in and it raining. And I know you're ashamed of that, and you've said sorry, but I've still lost out here. I've still had a crap day and I'm wet. The offender's sorrow lends but weak relief to him that bears the strong offence's cross. Which is a similar meaning to the previous line, I think, which is saying, I have lost out here. You're saying you're sorry, but the sorries aren't doing much, to be honest, mate. The sorries aren't enough. And now we're on to the final couplet. But but those tears are pearl which thy love sheds, and they are rich, and ransom all ill deeds. So he does a full 180, and he goes, oh, but those tears that you're shedding are really lovely, and they show how much you love me, and so I forgive you for all your ill deeds and your wrongdoings. So I question, what's the bloody point in writing the sonnet in the first place if you're just going to forgive him at the end of it? If you're just going to say, oh, but I forgive you. It also makes me think maybe Shakespeare was reading this out and he hadn't written the last 2 lines. So he's reading it to his lover, sort of saying, do you get it? You're annoying me. You're being an arsehole at the moment. And then his lover starts crying. The recipient of the poem starts crying. He sees that, quickly writes the last 2 lines, goes, oh no, but I do still love you because your tears are beautiful and it shows how much you love me and I forgive you. So I wonder if that was how this one was written. He wrote all of the stuff before and then the final couplet came from the tears of the recipient. Something to think about. So all in all, I think it's clear to me that Shakespeare is in a toxic relationship with the recipient of his sonnets. And not enough people are talking about this. And I'm worried for him, to be honest, because he seems quite vulnerable. And for me, the meaning of the sun stuff is that the recipient gives the impression of sunniness and lightness and lures Shakespeare in, and then is a real arsehole, which is almost sort of split personality, isn't it? He's saying, you're lovely 1 minute, you give the impression of loveliness, and then you're horrible to me, and you're overcome by this darkness and this rage. It doesn't sound like a nice relationship, does it? You want to grab Shakespeare by his ruff and shake him and go, get out of there. Get out, Shakespeare, while you still can. Now, I think it's time to put this to our story. And if you remember last week, the shadowy figure was revealed as John Donne, the famous poet, of course. And he'd obviously sent an ugly person in place of him to test Shakespeare. And Shakespeare was sort of fine with the ugly person, to be honest. Before, John Donne revealed himself and went, it's actually me that wrote the letters, I was just testing you. And this really pissed Shakespeare off. And it's toxic. So it fits in to these poems. And Shakespeare goes off to the pub and he meets up with his sort of frenemy, Ben Jonson. And they have a couple of pints. Ben Jonson's quite pissed. And Shakespeare is trying to write a sonnet that will express to John Donne just how he feels. So he's just read Sonnet 33 to Ben Jonson as a sort of first draft. Shakespeare finishes reading Sonnet 33 to a by this point very drunk Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson says, I don't get it. What's all this stuff about the sun? And Shakespeare says, oh, you are thick, aren't you, Ben Jonson? It's a metaphor. The sun is John Donne, and the clouds are also John Donne, and it's all about John Donne being an arsehole. He pretends he's all nice and stuff, and sunny, but he's actually an arsehole. Do you get it? And Ben Jonson says, I get it, I think I get it, but I don't know why at the end you forgive him. I thought you hated this guy. And Shakespeare said, yes, but the thing is, he's quite hot, you know, and I am attracted to him, and I guess he's a good writer as well. Ben Jonson says, I don't know, I haven't read much of his work, to be honest. I've hardly heard of him. He's probably not as good as we are. And Shakespeare said, of course he's not as good as we are, but he gives it a good go. Then suddenly Ben Jonson jumps up from his stool and says, I have an idea. Do you want to hear it? Shakespeare said, yes, of course I want to hear it. Ben Jonson says, what you gotta do is write a sonnet, but not write the last 2 lines. So write a sonnet all about how horrible he is, and you can do the sun stuff if you want. If you want to keep doing that, if you think that's good. I personally would not do the sun stuff. I don't think it's that great personally. But yeah, if you want to do the sun stuff, keep doing the sun stuff. Anyway, leave the last 2 lines blank and write them on the spot, judging by his reaction. So if he gets pissed off, then write the last 2 lines saying, you know what, I'm done with you, it's over. But if he gets all sad and sorry, then you can write, oh, go on then, I forgive you, I'm sorry. What do you think of that? And Shakespeare said, by God, it might just work. Has anyone ever told you, Ben Jonson, you're a genius? And Ben Jonson said, no. Actually, no one's ever told me that. And he sits down on his stool and starts crying. Shakespeare says, oh, okay then. Anyway, I better go and do the writing, write some more stuff. So, bye then. And he leaves Ben Jonson crying in a nag's head. Shakespeare thinks if he runs back to the graveyard, John Donne might, for some reason, still be there 4 or 5 hours later. Maybe he's got a dead relative in the graveyard or something like that. And as he runs, he scribbles Sonnet 34 onto a piece of toilet paper that he picked up from the Nag's Head toilets. But of course, he leaves the final couplet blank. Eventually, he arrives at the graveyard, and lo and behold, John Donne is still there, crouched over a grave. Shakespeare says, Oi, John. John swivels round. Oh, it's you. You've come back. Shakespeare says, I have. Whose grave is that? John Donne says, no idea. Shakespeare said, well, why are you crying over it, crouched crying over it? And John Donne says, I don't know. Shakespeare thinks this is incredibly beautiful and powerful for some reason. And he says, listen, you've been an arsehole to me. And John Donne says, I know I have. I'm sorry. And Shakespeare says, I've written a sonnet. And John Donne says, oh, do you want me to have a look over it and try and make it better? Shakespeare said, no, obviously not. I'm the best writer in the world. What are you talking about? John Donne says, well, I've done a few sonnets in my time, so thought you might need an expert's opinion. And Shakespeare says, shut up and just listen. Shakespeare removes Sonnet 34 from his back pocket and reads Sonnet 34. Sun, why did you make it look like it was going to be a really beautiful day and make me leave the house without my raincoat, only to let horrible clouds overtake me as I walk, hiding your sunshine in their rotten smoke? It's not enough that you broke through the clouds to dry my wet, storm-beaten face, because no man can be happy with a cure that heals the wound but doesn't heal the disgrace. Nor does it make me feel better that you're ashamed, because even though you repent, I've still lost out. When someone's really pissed you off, saying sorry doesn't help much. At this point, Shakespeare looks up from his sonnet and sees John Donne crying, and he thinks, I shall forgive, and writes down the final couplet before reading it. Ah, but those tears you were shedding because you loved me are so rich, and they make up for all the shitty things you've done. I just want to scream at Shakespeare and say, don't get into a relationship with John Donne. It's a big mistake. John Donne seems toxic as hell. But I didn't write this story. It's real life. Anyway, until next week. Bye.